Hey guys, welcome to a new video. Like, comment and subscribe if you enjoy. Without any further interruptions, enjoy the what if. The Academy spends a lot of time on how to get hit. Like far more time on it than they do on anything else. Chakra control, basic weapons, history, math, even taijutsu. All of them are less practiced, drilled, and trained, compared to the art of getting hit real hard. This is probably the only reason Naruto even survived the blow that blindsided him. That in Uzumaki blood he didn't even know he had. Sent flying by a kick, judging by the more significant bruising on his ribs and intense feeling of pain in his chest as they broke. He hit the arena wall with a thud, a sound that probably would have rung throughout the Great Leaf Village if it wasn't already thundering with the chorus of combat. Metal shrieked out. Civilians were surprisingly calm, at least for civilians in an active level 1 combat zone. Although, that may be because of the presence of Jiraiya in the stands. Stands that were buffeted with smoke before dozens of dog and horse-sized toad summons were suddenly spread throughout. They were obviously prepared for this, Naruto thought to himself, taking note of their positioning and tactics. Some were focused on ganging up on surprised ninja from Suna. They must be the enemy then. The toads were prepared enough to noticeably be targeting Junin and what appeared to be important Chunin. While more lone toads were preoccupied with protecting civilians alongside Konoha Chunin and Genin, leading them away from the violence and into designated shelters and safe zones. Naruto could feel his ribs basically knitting themselves back together, bones shifting into proper place and tissue regrowing. His focus shifted from the toads to the sage himself as he made his way through the stands and towards the arena floor. He looked terrifying, like a man Naruto had never seen before in any of their training sessions. Not even their most intense, bone-crushing beat-down ones. His body moved naturally in a familiar pattern Naruto had studied plenty before, but his hair was already out and harder than steel. His needle Jizo was active in a way Naruto hadn't even remotely known was possible. Both shielding the living legend from outside attacks and projectiles as well as dashing out in lightning-fast spikes. Bouquets of hair grew from the nearly knee-length hair shield surrounding him and spearing enemy ninja in vital and non-vital areas. Naruto chose this moment to fully come back to his senses. His ribs still healing relatively quickly, the bones already set. His gaze shifted away from his recent sensei and his increasingly blood-soaked hair weapon. Oddly colored sand swarmed the arena floor, sorta like Gaara's sand but brighter. The mild concussion he most likely had was messing with his senses a bit. It swirled like a hurricane, grabbing Konoha ninja and tossing them around like ragdolls, or simply spearing straight through them. That's when Naruto remembered what had happened before he had the unlucky opportunity to be on the receiving end of that earth-shattering kick. Hayate had just signaled his victory over Gaara when an explosion went off in the cage's booth. Followed by a poorly executed mass genjutsu, petals seemingly floating downwards along a breeze except only half formed and see-through. Almost as if the execution was off, or perhaps only half the expected number of ninja performed the combination genjutsu. Whatever it was, the poorly timed and executed genjutsu acted as an unofficial starting bell for the battle. Suna ninja startled by the failed technique were noticeably confused and off balance in the opening moments. The technique that was meant to give them the extra edge in the first crucial moments of battle now serves to hinder them. Konoha ninja, originally shocked momentarily by the explosion, were now given a brief moment of steel-hardened clarity. The failed mass genjutsu an obvious almost even textbook strategy to give the defenders pause allowing the attacking force to slip in with the crucial deep first blow. In no more than 5 seconds all of this had happened, and those 5 seconds would majorly tilt the odds in either side's favor. Suna should have had the initial edge, but their unexpected genjutsu failure not only caused them to pause but seemingly allowed Konoha to even the scales. First to move was the Anbu. They seemed to flood from entryways and shadows. It was like watching cockroaches scurry away when you kick a bag in an alley. Probably only 2 platoons worth, but around 100 Anbu in any one place was terrifying. You almost never actually see combat-ready Anbu inside the village at all. Only flits of them over rooftops or funny-looking shadows laying in corners, so this many in one spot so quickly was both comforting and the stuff of nightmares. They were followed only fractionally behind by the Junin in the crowd. Which spoke volumes about Konoha's defense intelligence, Naruto noted. The Anbu were ready, That wasn't just a blind swarm of a surprised force retaliating. They got into positions, set up zones and perimeters, and then moved into action alongside the reacting Chunin. It was when the Chunin and Genin started to really react and get into gear that Naruto's memory got hazy. More like blurry, as he suddenly went from standing to partially embedded in the arena wall. The rest of the stands and his surroundings blurred by him on his very quick trip to his current location. Currently, Naruto looked towards the smoking cage's booth and the path of destruction leading away from it and onto the arena's rooftop. Dozens of bodies littered the path, some of them Suna ninja, but the vast majority were dressed like Anbu with all-white masks. Most likely not friendly, judging from the many others that were flitting around the arena harassing Konoha ninja. Naruto felt rather than heard the oppressive wave of chakra that suddenly arose. It was coming from the rooftop that Hokage-sama had taken as his chosen battleground, where a purple barrier had sprouted up and the obvious signs of heavy combat taking place within it. Naruto looked at it for a few moments longer and figured that any battle that the god of shinobi deemed to enter was one that he could not currently help with. Under almost any other circumstances, Hiruzen would currently be an enormous ball of nerves. His village was under siege. His own former friend was the orchestrator of the siege alongside Konoha's supposed ally Suna, and he was currently stuck inside a barrier being sustained by the Sound Four and a second barrier being maintained by 4 of his own Anbu guard. But things were far from bleak, and if they played their cards just right, things might even be looking quite bright. For one, a not insignificant part of Danzo's invasion plan hinged on his supposedly wayward student Orochimaru and around 300 Otogaker shinobi. Both to help kill Hiruzen, and to spread Konoha's forces thin between the arena, the inner village, and the village walls. But without Otogaker there was no outward threat at their gates, and Danzo suddenly lost an S-ranked player and added one to his opponent's roster. Not to mention the mass damage to the plan caused by Orochimaru warning Konoha early, Anbu already in predetermined kill boxes, key Chunin alert and ready surrounding the arena, and most importantly Jiraiya. Second, was that with Jiraiya in the village, and in the arena. He was ready and waiting long before the genjutsu was set, and he had his own clones covertly moving throughout the stands, both marking important enemy combatants, as well as preparing summoning seals in key locations for his toad summons to appear. With Jiraiya's preparedness, he was able to severely handicap any enemy combatants within the arena before the fighting even began. And his subsequent rampage once it all started up certainly aided in thinning out a significant portion of the enemy Suna ninja. But Jiraiya's real job was to either contain any uppity foreign cage who weren't involved or to deal with Rasa in the likely event that he wasn't caught within the barrier jutsu. And seeing as how the current cage was currently in the middle of the arena near his Jinchuriki son after he all but curb-stomped Naruto across the arena, meant that Jiraiya certainly only had one real objective in mind. Kill the idiot that would dare invade his village and hurt his unknowing godson. Was the only thought or plan going through the Sanin's head anymore. Possibly the strongest of the 3 legendary ninja hailing from Konoha slowly made his way through the crowd and down towards the arena. His lack of speed was not a method of instilling fear in his opponents or the invaders. His presence alone did that, but a sort of stalling tactic as the 2 elderly toads sitting on his shoulders aided him in the gathering and balancing of natural chakra with his own large reserves. Ya know Jiraiya boy, ya wouldn't have us with you when you do this if you just finished your training. The toad on his left shoulder said as a brace of shurikens could be both heard and felt bouncing off of his supposedly defensive technique. A small controlled burst of chakra was all it took for a spike of his hair to silence the source. Yes ma, I'm sorry. As you can see I have been more than a little busy recently. What with a whole invasion, a gentle slap struck the side of his head from the toad who hadn't yet spoken. Boyo, we both know that you had plenty of time to finish your trainin'. It's been years since you spent more than a night in Myoboku. Jiraiya simply let out a low sigh. Yes pa, yes ma. I promise I'll finish my training as soon as we are through with the backlash from Suna's little stunt. A nod was the only response he got from both ancient summonses. That was when he suddenly noticed he no longer needed to extend his senses around him to feel both enemy and friendly combatants in the area. He suddenly innately felt each of their presences and exact locations. Less like a traditional radar based on chakra exuded and controlled by the body, and more like an innate understanding of the world around you, almost like looking at a puzzle after you finished it. Once you understood, the puzzle just fit together and you knew the whole picture. In this instance, the picture being your exact surroundings for a significant distance. Upon this otherworldly feeling coming over him, Jiraiya allowed his needle Jizo to recede. At least 6 separate Suna ninja in the area noticed this and immediately took it as a sign of fatigue and let loose a volley of kunai and shuriken to impale the dangerous man. Only for their weapon volley to bounce off of him like he was steel. With one discreet hand sign in response, thin individual strands of hair shot out from Jiraiya's spiky mane and impaled each of the 6 ninja that had attacked him. And no sooner than the spikes had appeared, they disappeared along with the man himself. Jiraiya reappeared on the arena floor, subconsciously placing himself between his still healing student and the rampaging cage. Tendrils of golden sand emanated from the enemy's leader, similar to Gaara's own offensive technique, writhed and swung about. They were slowly spreading from his body and moving out into the stands as he gathered more and more chakra into the technique. Knocking Konoha ninja around the arena and impaling those too slow to dodge the smaller yet sharper tendrils that hid in the shadows of the larger ones. Jiraiya rushed through hand seals faster than most in attendance could see the movement, let alone the signs he was making. And suddenly a large swamp spread out from under his feet. Soon it grew to encompass more than half the arena floor, and the entirety of the area that the cage claimed for himself. A green blur was suddenly sent careening from the inner circle of the writhing tendrils and embedded itself in a wall. The dust settled and Might Guy was revealed, crouched where his feet met the wall, only the crater 3 times the size of his body showing that he had previously been moving faster than most Junin dreamed of. Suddenly Jiraiya turned into command mode and barked out an order to his technical junior. "Guy, I need you to remove the other friendlies from the arena floor and then stay at a distance with the tendrils. No use throwing more bodies into the buzzsaw now that I've fully prepared. Jiraiya-sama, they are moving very fast, and only get faster the closer you get to the center." "Are you sure?" Guy's natural inclinations towards his fellow ninjas' well-being was appreciated but certainly not necessary. "I've been fighting S-rank ninjas since you were in diapers. I appreciate the concern, but at the moment you will be better served making sure the bastard doesn't try to extend his range any further and put more allies in danger. Just do your best to keep his reach within the arena walls, don't want him poking at our backs in the stands." The Sanin's look brokered no further disagreements, and the green beast was suddenly gone. A brief uplift of dust, the only thing marking his quick departure to carry out Jiraiya's orders. Soon the arena was just about empty. The only people left were Naruto still embedded in the wall, Guy and a few of his Junin pals flitting about on the edges of the cage's current territory, and himself. The fighting in the stands both calming down and staying far away from the cage's deadly golden tendrils. "Dash. Fuck," the blonde exclaimed as he pried his left arm from the concrete he was currently embedded in. A piece of rebar he hadn't previously noticed was stuck 2 or 3 inches into the arm he had just cleanly pulled from the wall. His overflowing chakra and adrenaline both let him ignore the inconsequential pain as well as begin the accelerated healing process. He extricated himself from the wall and fell to his knees. He figured he had broken more than his initial estimates, but not much. He should be up and ready pretty soon. He popped a soldier pill into his mouth, both filling out his reserves and bringing him to his feet. He glanced around before holding his hand out. A split second passed before the Jishiku appeared in his left hand, and he had to focus a bit harder with his right hand. It seemed that the cage's attack had sent the weapon rather far from him, which immediately caused Naruto to tense. Not again, never again. He redoubled his efforts and hardened his chakra. With another flex, his naginata finally appeared in his right hand. Good, he thought to himself. I'm going to need both of these for the fight ahead. From what he could figure out, the 4th cage's bloodline was the same as his son's, except he utilized gold dust instead of his son's golden sands. This might actually make Naruto's job easier. A chakra-based magnetic bloodline, that was a fortunate outcome for the genin. He would probably look back on these thoughts after his massive head trauma had cleared up and realize what an insane decision he had made, but that was a problem for a future and rational Naruto. This Naruto was pissed, invade his home, put his team and friends in danger, and then blindside him. He was all but literally seeing red, or maybe he had been hit in the head as well and literally was seeing red. Either way, that was a problem for the medic nin to figure out later. He watched the tendrils whipping throughout the lower arena. Seemingly striking out as someone inside that clusterfuck appeared to be throwing around high-level ninjutsu. A swamp was already surrounding the area. That was something the blonde recognized. Jiraiya must be in there trying to take the foreign cage down. With this, Naruto allowed the Jishuku in his left hand to slip and he switched into a reverse grip, the blade going off to his left. He then choked up on his naginata, a long weapon that is traditionally wielded with two hands. But Naruto never was one for tradition. Satisfied that his two weapons that were not meant to be wielded together were as comfortable as they would ever get in his grip, he prepared his chakra and flexed it one more time, forcing himself forward towards the deadly fray. His naginata leading the way, like a horseman's lance. He wielded it about in front of himself, using quick and carefully controlled strikes to cut through the tendrils. The disconnected half fell limply to the floor, while the other half would continue on before the cage realized it had been cut and pulled it back in towards himself. The cut-off gold sand eventually found its way back towards its user as well, but at a more sedate pace. Perhaps a general magnetic attraction towards himself, but he can only currently manipulate the gold sand attached to his technique. After 2 or 3 of these precise strikes, the man must have noticed. Because his efforts toward Naruto suddenly doubled and then tripled. Soon Naruto found he was unable to keep up, both the number and speed of the tendrils overwhelming him. He brought his left hand about, Jishuku still tight in his grip. He prepared to expel his chakra violently before he was suddenly lifted off his feet. He found himself face to face with Jiraiya, his short-time sensei's face looking suspiciously more like a toad than he remembered. His pupils had changed to match and a few warts dotted his complexion. Naruto would have laughed if he wasn't in the middle of yet another S-ranked fight that was clearly way over his head. You little shit, you were supposed to stay put or flee, not jump right into the middle of a fight you started. The Sannin's voice broke out over the sounds of battle, Naruto still being carried under one of his arms. Well, what do you expect me to do? The asshat blindsided a genin, and just so happens to have a bloodline that I've created 2 pretty solid counters to. He quipped, surprised by his own lightheartedness in such a dour situation. At this, the Toad Sannin's face lit up. Naruto could see something dawning upon the elder ninja, before he was suddenly placed down just outside of the metallic tendril's deadly territory. Jiraiya looked at him before he must have noticed Naruto's expression change as a wild tendril darted out and towards his midsection. For his part, the sage merely stepped over just to the side of the strike and struck his own hand out. It broke right through the tendril and caused it to go limp. A display that cemented Jiraiya's image as a badass into Naruto's mind, even if he would die before he ever told the pervert. Listen here, ya idiot. Normally I wouldn't involve you in a fight like this, but you may just be able to cut it short. I'm gonna need you to do something really, really stupid, he said to the genin. Could you explain what that stupid thing is at least? Well, and you aren't going to like this. But I'm basically going to throw you into the middle of that, he said as he gestured towards the cage's deadly defensive technique. I've only gotten close enough to see him a few times, and I'll need to expend a significant amount of energy to get even closer to him. But with you, I may be able to end this quickly. Naruto just nodded dumbly, still stuck on the part where he was going to be thrown into an almost literal wood chipper. Can you make your blade's magnetic field cover your body? He asked seriously. A small toad that Naruto just now noticed quickly interrupted. I know what are plannin', Jiraiya boy, and you better not. A stern look from the Sannin quieted the feminine voice down. This was obviously a dire situation if he was even considering something this insane. Good Konoha ninja were dying, and the longer he took to remove the enemy's head, the more damage would be done. I'm not sure, but even if I can, it'll probably only last for a second or two at best. At this, Jiraiya seemed to hesitate, before he quickly quashed that feeling deep down and hardened his resolve. That will be plenty. I just need to get in close once and this fight will be over. Naruto was a little hesitant at the legend's words, but a foreign cage was currently running amok within their village walls. And Naruto certainly was not thinking clearly. This was basically the exact time to try something insane and dangerous. Do it, the blonde said aloud. His naginata simply disappeared back into its containing seal, and he held the Jishuku in a much more practical and comfortable grip. He began to slowly build chakra, both evenly throughout himself, and within his blade. As he quickly maxed out on the amount he could just hold naturally within his body outside of his coils, he nodded his ascent to Jiraiya. As the living legend picked him up to do what is quite possibly the dumbest thing he had ever done, he began to flex his chakra and channel it down his arm toward his blade. He let out a single silent prayer to whoever might be listening, and suddenly he was flying through the air. He flew like a spear, head first with his blade gripped near him, seemingly ready to strike out at any wayward tendrils. As he neared them, the cage must have seen him, because suddenly dozens of them converged on his location, like a wave of terrifying razor-sharp metal. Finally, he allowed his chakra to fill the blade. He could feel the power within it as it thrummed, and time seemed to slow. Metal from the tendrils flaked away as it neared him before a ringing was heard throughout the battlefield. Then suddenly it was like they hit an invisible wall when they came within a few feet of Naruto, and then they were violently repelled. The space was easily twice the size of what Naruto had hoped for, and in a brief second, he could see the surprised look of the cage as he hurtled in towards him and broke through the final barrier. Once again Naruto felt rather than saw the immense usage of chakra near him. It was so overbearing he found it hard to breathe, but it passed quickly. Literally, in less time than it takes to blink, Jiraiya's golden red form overtook his own and collided with the wide-eyed cage. A blinding light flashed out from the 2S ranked combatants as Jiraiya's massive Rasengan collided with the mixed metallic visage of the cage. Instead of being sent flying, as Naruto so often was when struck by the technique's smaller version, he was slowly ground down into the floor of the arena. The cage's own defensive technique finally gave out as he violently crumpled to the floor. Suddenly the massive storm of golden tentacles calmed down and dropped, like a puppet with its strings cut. And the form of the father could be seen lying next to that of the son, the family resemblance noticeable to anyone around. This all happened in a few short seconds. Naruto landed against the opposing wall of the arena, although this time in a controlled crouch. And he made his way back towards the center, where Jiraiya stood above the leader of the enemy ninja. Silence slowly crept around the arena, as the few remaining Suna ninja within the arena noticed that their cage had been stomped into the ground by Konoha's Toad Sage. Soon they began to surrender, and that marked the downturn of the fighting. At this Naruto allowed himself to calm. He was standing next to Jiraiya above the cage, who he now knew was named Rasa thanks to Jiraiya. The Sannin put an arm around Naruto's shoulder gently, as the fatigue began to pile on and his injuries made themselves known. The last dregs of adrenaline were leaking out of his system when Jiraiya finally spoke up again. "Kid, that was the ballsiest thing I've ever seen anyone do and live." Naruto probably would have allowed himself a smile at the compliment, if his body hadn't just given out from collective trauma and exhaustion. Hiruzen put his worries about Naruto-kun, Jiraiya-kun, and the rest of his beloved village to the side. He had faith in them, and in his ninja, they would come out stronger. He only needs to focus on his current objective. "I should have known to never trust a snake," spat the elderly shinobi half covered in bandages. Smoke billowed around him, and no discernible injury in his gut where Orochimaru's Kusanagi had pierced him only moments previously during the initial moments of Danzo's sabotaged coup. Hiruzen, garbed in his old Warring Clan-era battle armor, only needed to glance at his student to communicate the implications of Danzo's seemingly miraculous health. It seemed that Orochimaru's hard-gathered intelligence was proven true. Danzo had access to the Sharingan. And it is entirely possible he had more than one, judging by his relatively calm demeanor. "Old friend, I had no idea the depths you would sink to for power." The hurt and dismay in Hiruzen's voice sounded quite genuine. This was a man he had once considered a dear friend and rival, who he had apparently lost to the darkness inherent in the shinobi world. "Power?" Danzo questioned in anger. "I did this for the greater good, for the betterment of Konoha. The roots support the tree, whether or not the tree knows what needs to be done." Danzo's resolve seemed to be as firm as his words. It is only too bad that resolve led him towards a pointless rebellion fueled by his own delusions of grandeur. The greater good, Danzo, executing an entire clan on baseless suspicion so that you can further entrench yourself in their power is not for the betterment of the village. Hiruzen's face hardened. The political upheaval from this event alone is not for the betterment of this village. These are actions of a man desperate for his own power, his own gain. A quick glance at his student showed that her preparations were complete, and it was becoming increasingly obvious Danzo would not be stopped with mere words. Obviously you believed yourself above Tobirama's teachings, Sarutobi. He looked down at him, ready to continue their argument, but the third Hokage's hands blurred into motion at the same time as Orochimaru's barrier pulsed and turned a deeper shade of purple, hardening it against the worst-case scenario, a Danzo with multiple Sharingan, possibly multiple evolved Sharingan. Danzo incorrectly correlated the end of Hiruzen's odd sequence of hand seals with whatever happened to the barrier that surrounded them. So he was caught seemingly unaware when what appeared to be hundreds of the ceramic roofing tiles they were standing on speed towards him like kunai. In one smooth motion, Danzo leapt backward to gain distance from the deadly projectiles, while two Root Ninja, clad in black, emerged from his shadow to take the brunt of the surprise attack in his stead. However, what should have been a small early victory felt tainted. Most likely because of the victorious smile on Danzo's face. In obviously practiced hand seals too quick to properly follow, Danzo activated his technique. The two bodies seemed to turn to ash and melt away into the roof, at the same time as an equal number of sturdy stone coffins rose from the same place on the rooftop. Sarutobi noted the first and second markings emblazoned on both coffins and gave his student a knowing look. What? She responded to his non-verbal disapproval. I made certain he never got access to a working version of that technique on my end, and all of my agents assured me that he was years away from properly reverse engineering it. Hiruzen simply shrugged at this. The technique was sure to be imperfect, as well as their power limited in order for Danzo to control them. This would make things more difficult, but the end results would not be any different. I must confess to having lied previously, the traitor practically cackled out. I certainly knew not to trust a snake like you, Orochimaru, and I made sure that you had no inkling of my more important projects. With that said, the lids of both coffins slid off and landed with a resounding thud. Danzo slapped two sealed kunai into the heads of the emerging bodies of the first and second Hokage from the summoned coffins. Their previously stone-like faces turned to a more slack-jawed visage as Danzo inserted the seals. Your technique is obviously hackneyed, Danzo. Can you even control them? What seemed like another verbal jab at his former friend was quickly picked up by his student as a cue for one of their many pre-set plans for this very fight. As quick as her namesake, Orochimaru dashed forward towards Danzo and his partially resurrected former cage. Danzo's response was to lazily gesture a hand towards Orochimaru, and the men considered to be the founding father of Konoha moved to intercept her. In a flash of motion, her kusanagi flew through the air with a deadly whistle, beating its master to the punch by embedding itself in the first Hokage's head. Not even a beat later her hand appeared on the handle. She immediately got to work removing the blade and dismantling the two not-so-living legends, hacking and slashing at limbs, removing hands, even blinding them. Anything and everything she could do at close range to damage them and get a grasp on their current state of being. This continued for a few moments as the zombified cages could only react to her opening salvo by taking the attacks head-on. To her, cutting them was like cutting through sand, the resistance noticeably different compared to a human body, something she knew quite well. And the regeneration of their wounds was slower than expected, not an unwelcome surprise, as it most likely pointed toward the technique being poorly executed. The two legends soon regained their bearings as wood sprouted from the first's body, blocking sword strikes and reaching out toward her. While a wave of water bullets appeared from thin air around the second, ready to spear through the kunoichi who was currently vivisecting their resurrected bodies. Orochimaru was prepared for this, not believing for a moment that she would be able to dominate an entire fight with these two monsters masquerading as human men. Right when the first batch of water projectiles struck her body, she dissolved into mud, a prepared mud clone having replaced herself at the last moment. Before her two opponents could further search their surroundings, a dragon made of fire, buffeted by a wind technique, swept through the area. Obviously the handiwork of the third Hokage, allowing Orochimaru to gather some much-needed breathing room, as well as allowing Hiruzen to bypass both of their guards and move past his former sensei and mentors in a mad beeline for Danzo. There is nowhere to run, traitor. This barrier will not fall until you lay dead at my feet. Sarutobi wasted absolutely no time once he was past Danzo's disgraceful bodyguards. With no hand signs to signal his attack, Bullets of wind escaped his mouth while he closed the last few meters separating him from the soon-to-be corpse. Too many to properly dodge in time, Danzo was forced to absorb the blows from a few of the wind bullets. The bandages covering part of his face came loose from the attack, revealing the Sharingan implanted in his eye socket. If either of us is a traitor to Konoha, it is not me, Hiruzen. It is you who allowed weakness to fester, allowing Kumo to extract their pound of flesh from us for their transgressions. He leapt up and over a low strike from his opponent's spinning bow staff while beginning a set of hand seals, a barrage of kunai and shuriken leaving his sleeves in the same motion. Never one to miss a beat, the reigning Hokage batted all of the projectiles aside like they were toys thrown by an academy student. Throwing his bow staff as if it was a giant Fuma shuriken at Danzo's center mass, he also launched into his own hand seals, seemingly matching and then overtaking Danzo's own. They both finished within a heartbeat of each other. Hiruzen with the telltale exhale of a wind technique, and Danzo by clapping his hands together violently. Blades of wind flew out from his palms, dotted with the small yet deadly explosions of his vaunted vacuum techniques. While Hiruzen's jutsu seemed to have no visible effect, that is until Danzo's own technique neared him and the explosions suddenly stopped. It seems that the professor has not been slacking in his training. Danzo's response was terse, unlike his previously stern and aloof manner. It's not that he necessarily expected the Hokage to fall prey to his wind vacuum technique, but to have negated them so perfectly before he had even used it, was more than a little disconcerting. Your greatest mistake, among the myriad of others, was convincing yourself that I was weak, old friend. He quickly moved to dodge the black flames Danzo sent his way. The black flames of Amaterasu said to burn for 7 days and nights. Without the proper preparations, it would be a difficult technique to counter. But, Hiruzen simply tossed out a small scroll. It unfurled as it flew through the air and landed in the flames. The flames themselves being absorbed into the seal on the scroll, licking away at the edges but not actually burning it. He allowed a simple smile to grace his elderly features. Danzo, there is nothing you can do that I have not prepared a counter for. The scroll flew back through the air and into his hand, the glint of ninja wire now visible. The barrier will not allow you to leave, and Orochimaru is more than enough to hand your poorly resurrected monstrosities. Surrender and I may let you live. A lie, and they both knew it. Danzo was as good as dead when Orochimaru returned to tell Hiruzen of his plans. If only he had gotten to him earlier, a lot of damage could have been mitigated. Sadly, he had been too complacent, too trusting that his old rival still had Konoha's best interest at heart, even if they both had different methods of securing those interests. The two elder shinobi met again in a bout of taijutsu, hands and the occasional kunai meeting in a flash, before a stone spike pierced the traitor from behind. The wound in his gut, reminiscent of the one Orochimaru had given him earlier, immediately began gushing blood. Before it suddenly wasn't, as if it had phased out of existence, blood no longer running down his body in deep rivulets like it had moments before. You cannot win this fight, Sarutobi, no matter your preparations. Your weakness allowed me to grow in strength for the betterment of Konoha. The partially bandaged man was beginning to sound maniacal, his gaze hardening as a grand fireball emerged from his mouth. Hiruzen, having not noticed the half-seals Danzo had been forming by his side, had no time to dodge. Emerging from the fireball, his clothes singed and burnt, Hiruzen's expression had only grown more grave. It seemed like it was time to get serious about this. The third Hokage's chakra flared in an intense demonstration of power indicative of his years of training and experience. Even to the Junin-level Anbu outside of the barrier, it felt as if they were standing too close to a roaring fire. His presence was expanding, the fire growing alongside it as it expanded like it was out of control. Before it suddenly stopped, its absence felt like the bitter cold on a winter's night. A few moments after the abrupt absence of their Hokage's presence, the purple barrier fell. The dust settled. Exactly 1 week after the routed invasion coup conducted by the Hidden Sand Village and Danzo's illegally operating forces, a funeral was held for the fallen shinobi. It was a somber and solemn occasion, juxtaposed by the typically sunny and warm Konoha day. The only silver lining for many to cling to was how much worse it could have been, if not for the actions of the Sandaime, his 2 students, and Konoha's brave protectors. The service itself finished with a procession that ended at the memorial stone, where there was a ceremonial etching of the fallen's names into said stone. There were no shinobi burials in the village for the most part. Some clans could do so on their private grounds, but the village itself did not have the available land to spare for burial grounds for ninja. Too many die for it to be feasible. A sobering thought about the nature of their village's livelihood and reason for existence, but a fact nonetheless. The Lord Third Hokage gave an empowering speech, remembering the fallen as heroes. Their sacrifice is what keeps the will of fire blazing for future generations. There would have been no dry eyes if such a speech was spoken at any other funeral, but not a single tear was shed during the ceremony. This was a shinobi village, a military installation that served as the deadly hand of their daimyo in Fire Country. Mourning the dead was perfectly acceptable on any other occasion, but this was a funeral. Naruto Uzumaki had only been allowed to leave the hospital the morning of the funeral. He had been healthy for at least a day or two before then. But the medic ninja had been adamant about his needed bed rest. After he passed out and Jiraiya brought him to the field hospital in the village, his injuries had appeared so dire that they almost pronounced him N110, medical code for too far gone to expend energy on during an emergency. But after Jiraiya's rather terse insistence, and witnessing his wounds almost literally knit themselves back together, the medical officer running the field hospital admitted him. He was found to have broken both sets of bones in both of his arms. They surmised it was from the amount and pressure of the chakra he had needed to focus in his arms to properly wield the blades' respective techniques against Ross's gold dust. Release. All of his ribs were broken and showed signs of severe bruising, as well as dozens of other smaller breaks, tears, fractures, and blunt force trauma. All topped off with what the head medical ninja could only later describe as enough brain damage to stunt an Inazaka. Which is a statement Naruto would like to somehow frame and display. Possibly with the medical ninja's signature on it. He had really only been let out because of the ceremony, and because a healthy person taking up a hospital bed after an invasion was a waste of resources, even if that health somehow defied most medical doctrine and knowledge. The death toll had been very light for Konoha, but there was still a dearth of injured, and a lack of medic ninja. His Chunin vest felt uncomfortably heavy. And not because there was enough smelted steel packed into it to supply a battalion with kunai and shuriken, which was a mostly familiar weight. No, it was heavy with responsibility and expectation. He displayed enough promise in unique and unknown techniques to acquire the gaze of every foreign cage. And that was before Jiraiya used him like a human kunai against Sunagaku's Yondaime cage. Not that the more public stories told it that way. So far, Naruto had only overheard a few of the village whispers since he left the hospital, and he has already heard an account that has him going toe-to-toe with the cage before Jiraiya eventually had to step in to help finish him off. In truth, he had been little more than a convenient tool for the Sannin to utilize in ending a possibly devastating fight much earlier. Allowing Konoha to pursue an unconditional surrender from Sunagaku, seeing as how a genin nullified their Jinchuriki before the invasion even took place, and then Jiraiya sent their cage fleeing unconscious on the backs of his Anbu and personal guard. Even if other villages' intelligence would know that was blatantly false, as would most reasonable people, doesn't mean it won't paint a massive target on his back. In this world, word and reputation, even if untrue, could be very powerful. And if Naruto did eventually get older and more powerful, it would certainly add to his reputation and credibility. If he wasn't already due to his status as a living weapon, he was certainly a target now. Mere hours after the conclusion of the state funeral, the Sandaime was already back to work. Currently wrapped up in a meeting that he would have liked to skip, but knew was very necessary for the inner working of village politics. He sat with the current village elders and his two former teammates under Tobarama Senju. They were entrenched in an argument about the future of one of the village's newest chunin. Through little fault of their own, the current generation hasn't created any strong enough ninja to lead and protect Konoha. A soft sigh escaped his lips, his face showing signs of his advanced age. Kakashi, Kami bless him, is our closest to S rank without killing himself. And I'm uncertain if he's in the proper state mentally to truly bridge that gap, and Guy could be that powerful, but only once before his likely death. Homura chose this moment to speak up. Hiruzen, you of all people must be able to see why playing favorites with the Uzumaki of all people could be seen negatively. We do not have the luxury of allowing an asset like Naruto-kun to simply be left to his own devices. And quite frankly, I'm more than done allowing some unwarranted stigma of one of our most promising ninja be the factor that prevents him from reaching or even surpassing his potential. Couldn't they see? This boy, man almost, was more than some way for Sarutobi to make amends for his past mistakes. Even if those mistakes were numerous and often. If Itachi was a truly once-in-a-generation prodigy, then a ninja like Naruto may very well be once in an era. He could be what ends up shaping the world for the foreseeable future, and Hiruzen wanted to see him do it. He thinks that potential may even be the reason his student, Orochimaru, has taken such an interest in his development. So that's what this is about. The boy no longer sees you as a grandfather, and you think this. Hiruzen cut him off by slamming his fist into the solid wood surface of his desk, as an intense wave of his chakra flooded the room like a raging river. This is about the future of our village, and I certainly will not have any of you questioning my motives or mental faculties. You who were taken in by Danzo's facade, you who helped him in his quest to turn Naruto into a living weapon, forcing my hand and forcing his early entry into a life of bloodshed. You who owe their lives to mere sentimentality and practicalism. He gestured to the two elderly ninja across from him, who did their best to look appropriately shamed. His threat had not gone over their heads. True, you may have eventually come around to the right side of thinking. But it took Danzo destabilizing the security of the village, both internally and abroad, for you to do so. He would not have his former teammates leading to more division within the village. This problem needed to be nipped in the bud immediately. Although, Hiruzen knew that he couldn't ignore their advice outright. Not about showing Naruto favoritism, they were practically spewing bullshit on that front. They grew much mired in public opinion and petty village politics in their old age. But they raised a valid point, even if accidentally. As Hokage, he certainly couldn't dedicate two of his top ninja just to train one newly promoted Chunin. That would be downright irresponsible. Maybe if they were both sharing and switching off training the lad while accomplishing their increasing duties. But Hiruzen knew both his students well enough to know that would happen when pigs fly. Orochimaru was a famously poor sharer. The infamous hot spring incident put Jiraiya and 3 of his then top jonin in the hospital for almost 3 months. And that was over Minato's apprenticeship, who only showed half as much promise as his unknowing heir does now. While Jiraiya tended to favor long periods of training and traveling, believing worldly experience is vital in developing a great ninja. A philosophy which, just so happened, to make his lifestyle of spying, whoring, and writing possible. And he also functioned as Konoha's spy master, at least in his free time. His white-haired student's spy network was much more of a wide net than Konoha's own, or even Orochimaru's, but it also had much wider holes. A sieve that gathered more large information than specifics. Hiruzen had literal rooms full of specific information on topics like enemy combatant information, defense statistics. Hell, he knew their intelligence library had enough crop yield data from Kumo's tobacco industry alone to fill a normal public library with twice over. Because in the past some bored Nara noticed a coinciding trend in tobacco yield and export numbers and Kumo's military preparedness for battle. As it turns out, Kumo Kager purchased cigarettes for their front-line troops to help keep morale up. This caused a significant increase in tobacco output and a decrease in tobacco export as Kumo purchased tobacco in preparation. What Hiruzen needed was a way to either force them to share the boy, or trick them into thinking it was their idea. He almost certainly could order them to share the boy, and force them to do so. But that would most likely result in a subpar outcome for all involved. However, he also knew that both his students were superbly interested in training the boy. Hiruzen could admit he would also like a hand in training Naruto, not that it would ever be possible. But when one sees someone with this kind of potential, it's nearly impossible to not want a hand in their development. Hiruzen would liken the urge to a similar feeling that leads a person or a people to carving a face into a mountain, a statement to history of your existence. Something that says, "Look, I existed." Like the grand monument bearing his own visage alongside his 4 compatriots sitting just out of his view through his office window, only instead it would be your name in the early stories of the man who changed the face of the world. It is possible that if he stroked their egos enough, he may even be able to get them to share without overtly tricking or lying to them. Perhaps, he mused silently to himself, if he somehow made it Naruto's decision, while subtly guiding the boy to the most prudent outcome. No, he said aloud. That line of thinking is exactly how their relationship had become so strained. Hiruzen trying to manipulate the decisions to match his predetermined plans. Could it possibly be as simple as asking Naruto-kun to play along? It would certainly be to the boy's benefit to do so. 2 of the Sannin training you was something many ninja would almost literally give an arm and a leg for. But having 2 of the Sannin, that raised another question to Hiruzen. Did Naruto even want to play along? Did he want to be apprenticed to either Jiraiya or Orochimaru? Let alone both. He had come so very far almost entirely on his own. Most of his skill and prowess coming from his own intense and exhaustive research and experimentation with chakra smithing, which he did with little to no help. But Hiruzen firmly believed, no he knew, that Naruto learning under his 2 students would be in his best interest if he was truly meant for greatness. After a minute or more of silence while the Hokage sat in thought, Koharu spoke up, Hiruzen. Only for her voice to be stopped by his raised hand. I am your Hokage, Koharu, and you would both do well to remember that and address me accordingly. He had ascertained the proper course of action, although he doubted it would be easy to pull off. Let alone make either of his 2 students very happy, at least not at first. But it would be what is best for Naruto, which in this current situation, would be what is best for Konoha. He dismissed the 2 people in the village he had once thought he could trust implicitly as his peers. They stopped in the open door of his office, allowing his next scheduled meeting to walk in past them. Both of his former teammates pausing to give a deferential nod to his 2 students walking alongside the most promising new chunin in Konoha's history sandwiched between them. Hiruzen allowed a smile to grace his tired features. Naruto looked good in his new vest, and he certainly deserved the promotion. He was honestly ready for it a long time ago, but the aged Hokage knew that the young Uzumaki had non-physical issues he needed to work through. And he knew that being placed on Kakashi's team allowed the groundwork for that emotional growth to take place. Sadly explaining that to the, at that time, emotionally distraught child soldier turned out to be more difficult than he had originally believed. Naruto had obviously taken his reassignment as a sign that Hiruzen not only didn't care about him or the loss of his entire team, but as a sign that he was just a pawn to the cage. Both of which were patently false. It was just nearly impossible to communicate that to the young man. In reality, Hiruzen cared quite deeply for the boy, and empathized with the loss of what Naruto considered to be a real family. Sadly he was not only the Hokage, who had larger responsibilities than the emotional development of a single genin, but he also knew that Naruto needed stability that Kakashi and his team could provide. Which honestly sounded a little crazy when he first thought of it, but deep down he believed Kakashi knew what he was doing, and thankfully the copy Nin displayed so admirably. Kakashi knew he should not be attempting to replace the blonde's former team, and he didn't really need to physically train Naruto much either. So instead he tried to focus on giving the kid roots and a support system. Both the Aburame and Nara ended up being boons in the endeavor as well. Ahem. Was the not so delicate way that his sole male student decided to interrupt his train of thought. The ungrateful brat. Of course Hiruzen knew they were here, but he was the sitting Hokage and assumed they would know that the meeting only starts when he starts it. For her part Orochimaru seemed to be indifferent to the proceedings, either content to allow her sensei a moment of peace, or more likely studying him and trying to ascertain what he was thinking about. And Naruto sat in one of the chairs across from his desk, relaxing, the boy having long since acclimatized himself to the office and the audience of the Hokage. Whether or not he liked it much. Well, since it appears only one of my students is mature enough for this meeting, I'll be addressing them. He made an exaggerated show of turning to Orochimaru before addressing her. An admirable effort was required to hide the mischievous smirk threatening to split his face, but it was ultimately unnecessary as Jiraiya had already fallen to the ground in an exasperated heap. While Naruto, the one person in the room with the least amount of training and experience in guarding his emotions, still somehow appeared to be the one most in control of himself. Perhaps he picked that up from his Aburame teammate. Poor social etiquette aside, Hiruzen began again, not so subtly cueing his students to shape up. I am at a crossroads in the path that should be taken with Naruto. He allowed the subtext to sink in with his audience. The Uzumaki needs a guiding hand, and I am uncertain which of you should be that hand. Naruto, you are obviously prodigious in your chosen specialty. No one here, or anywhere else in the elemental nations, can begrudge you that. He continued on, which is part of the reason why you need a new sensei. Naruto's objections were stopped by a hand from Hiruzen before they even left his throat. I am not necessarily looking to permanently take you away from Kakashi or the rest of your team, Naruto-kun. But even you should know that your little display with Jiraiya-kun during the Chunin exams painted a target on your back. He said, as if that was even close to the sole reason the boy was considered a VIP. Rubbing the back of his hair, Naruto was obviously uncomfortable with the attention he's attracted, not only from his cage but the rest of the ninja world. Although he certainly didn't seem to regret it, intense bodily injuries be damned. Not only do I need you to truly begin developing yourself, but you need a sensei who can both help and protect you in that journey. Kakashi is a powerful man, but even he would struggle to protect you and simultaneously handle any situation that may arise outside of the village. Naruto simply had to accept that fact, nodding along with his leader. It's not like he would be completely cut off from his team, it just seemed that their collective Chunin careers were diverging a little sooner than he had anticipated. Not to mention either of the Sannin present here would be far more effective sensei when it comes to actually developing his current skills. But that still left the question of who. Do I get any say in all of this? Naruto finally spoke up, glancing indignantly around the room full of living legends. Hiruzen steepled his hands under his chin, resting his elbows on his desk for a few moments. Before he snapped his fingers and a pipe appeared in his mouth as an anbu melted from the shadows to light it with an additional snap of the fingers before disappearing back into whatever technique hid them from view. Well my boy, yes and no. The surprised look on Naruto's face was almost worth the indignant looks from his students. No matter, he would get them to work together whether they liked it or not, for Naruto's sake. No matter, he would get them to work together whether they liked it or not, for Naruto's sake. But first he needed to speak to the blonde alone. A nod to his two students let them know that they needed to leave. Orochimaru did her best to look both apathetic and annoyed, while Jiraiya put up an indignant display. Their reactions both for show, they knew he was doing this for good reason. They quickly bowed out with no further fuss. Neither of them doing so literally, as they both show their disrespect by leaving out his office's now open window. The brats. Hiruzen looked at the room's sole other occupant, still sat across from him, and let out a sigh. Past mistakes flooding back to him, his memory never allowing himself to forget. Naruto, I would like your help in getting my two idiot students to agree to both be your sensei. To put it mildly, Naruto found himself at a loss for words. The third had never seemed to ask for his input in anything before. Let alone asking for his input and help in a plan like this, tricking two of the Sannin into sharing him as sensei. Naruto-kun, I've obviously made some mistakes in the past regarding my approach to you. The Hokage looked more tired than Naruto had ever seen him. He doubted that the third had even looked this haggard after his somewhat secret battle with the traitor Danzo and the resurrected first and second Hokages. The mistakes of his past were evident in his features. Not in the old scars and battle wounds, mind you. They were visible in the deep bags under his eyes, and stone-etched wrinkles around his mouth and eyes indicative of deep frowning and worries in the past. Even his general demeanor looked worn down, his posture slipping even if only minutely with age. It was difficult, to say the least. Trying to both anchor you in reality, and to your home. Balancing that with my responsibilities as Hokage after the fourth's passing. A deep sigh seemed to escape him, but no sound was heard. It seems I lost sight of your thoughts and feelings in all of it. You seemed like such a bright personality, like you could weather the storms to come. He took another pause, gathering himself in a rare display of true unmoderated humanity, even if only a small one. Even if only slight, it was a look into the real person under the banner of Hokage and God of Shinobi. But I realize now that not only was I wrong in believing that you had the mental faculties to deal with the stress so young, but I was wrong in thinking that you could simply accept the path that had been predetermined for you. The Hokage let a soft chuckle escape his lips, and yet look what you accomplished. Seemingly out of spite, no less. He said, gesturing to the Jishuku on Naruto's lap, having removed it from his belt strap when sitting down. Naruto had no idea how to respond to his elder's words. He didn't really have the social adaptations to process it, he was only just really catching up to his peers when it comes to healthy relationships. having had only Masamune Jiji when he was younger after the rift grew between Hiruzen and himself. His original team had been his first time really interacting with his peers in any extended way, and that hadn't ended great for him. Their loss had quite possibly caused him to backslide on all of his progress. He grew despondent and reclusive, rarely leaving his forge other than for the occasional mission filling in for shorthanded teams. Team Kakashi was slowly bringing him up to speed, but there was only so much he could make up for. He didn't have parents or caretakers to observe and learn from, so his baseline was set rather low. The Uzumaki simply tightened his grip on the blade, fighting the emotions threatening to come to the top. Shinobi, do not cry. I guess I got too engulfed in being Hokage. I've done it so long I just became used to the social hierarchy. I spoke. Ninja, listen. But you were not one of my shinobi, you were a child. Desperate for contact and interaction, and you ended up filling that void with your weapons and research, and thankfully you found a mentor of sorts who could fill my shoes. At this a smile graced Hiruzen's aged lips. A somber note was definitely visible in his countenance, but it was a smile nonetheless. Naruto all but choked back on his emotions, his throat felt too raw to properly speak up. He had spent far too long seeing Hiruzen as his cage, a stone-faced visage carved into the top of the mountain. He didn't hate Hiruzen for the past, he really didn't. Naruto just wasn't the kind of person that could really hate just about anyone. But he certainly resented the man for it, even if it was deeply internalized. His early hate for the villagers as they ignored him soon turned to apathy. They decided that they didn't need him, so he soon came to the same conclusion. Of course it still hurt. What human, let alone a child, would enjoy being ostracized? But he soon discovered that not everyone was the same. He found solace in the Ichirakus and Masamune Jiji, and eventually in his first genin team. He decided soon after he became a genin that he didn't care for the villagers, as long as he had people who saw past it all, saw past his tenant as the Hokage finally informed him when he graduated, he could be happy. He had a home, and he had people around him that made it feel full enough. But he would be lying if he said these things didn't sit in him, like a weight on his chest. Sometimes it could get so overwhelming it felt hard for him to breathe. He had gotten so used to it that he only noticed now, when he felt the weight get a little lighter. Naruto took a few calming and quiet deep breaths before looking back up at the third Hokage, only just now realizing he had looked away from the man. He searched for the words he wanted to speak, eventually deciding on a simple and somber, "Thank you." The rest of his sentence going unsaid between the two, Hiruzen able to grasp the meaning from tone alone. "No, Naruto-kun, thank you." The two sat in silence for a little while longer, eventually exchanging a few more quiet words and sentiments. The mending strands of their fractured relationship drawing closer as they both visibly grew more comfortable. "So," the blonde eventually said aloud, "how are we supposed to get them to agree to this?" A puff of smoke billowed from Hiruzen's lips as he spoke. "That's the ingenious part. They'll do all the work, my boy." He paused to take another drag before continuing. "Once they've each spent time training and mentoring you, even for a relatively short period, they'll have no choice but to agree or lose out entirely. Hell, with the way Jiraiya has been pushing him to just go ahead and approve the paperwork for his apprenticeship of the boy, he would only really need to get Orochimaru interested. Possibly allow them to officially work together before he sent her to Suna. It wouldn't be out of the question that Naruto would accompany her. And Naruto wouldn't even really need to do anything unusual, at least not in comparison to the stuff he normally does, as long as he was in on the plan and willing to receive top-notch instruction. His natural genius had already attracted the snake solely through information reports and Hiruzen's own reports. Imagine what he can do in 3 weeks in a foreign diplomacy mission. And if she wasn't already pressing him to make Naruto her student, Hiruzen would eat his own hat. The cage was so certain of Naruto's ability being enough to subdue Orochimaru's ego into agreeing to share Naruto, that he was already mentally drawing notes of the documents his secretary would need to arrange for it to go through in time for their trip to Suna. If either of his students can't see the raw potential oozing from every pore in Naruto's body within a week of training, he might have failed them as a teacher. Then maybe he'll send all 3 of them on a mission only they could possibly succeed in. His wayward blonde student would not be convinced easily, she is too mired in her past. Hiruzen thought to himself, taking relaxing drags from his pipe while he sat in his office with Naruto. Thank you for watching. If you enjoyed the video, be sure to like, comment and subscribe, as well as checking out the author on fanfiction.net.